A figure sat at their picnic table, but vanished whenever they approached. At first it was just a silhouette. The campground lay in a shallow clearing ringed by tall pines that leaned inward like listeners. The picnic table stood near the center beside a cold fire ring, its wood bleached gray by weather and old smoke. From the trailhead you could see it clearly: bench, tabletop, the crooked leg propped with a stone. And someone sitting there. "Hey!" Mark had said, lifting a hand. The figure didn't move. It sat hunched slightly forward, elbows resting on the table as if studying the wood grain. We had been hiking all afternoon through long corridors of trees where the air smelled damp and mineral, like turned earth. The temperature had dropped as the sun lowered behind the ridge, and the clearing seemed darker than it should have been. But the figure was unmistakable. Then we stepped closer, and it was gone. No footsteps, no movement away, just an empty table and the slow rustle of pine needles under a cooling wind. Mark laughed at first. Guess we scared them off. But the laugh didn't land anywhere. The clearing absorbed it. I remember noticing how quiet the forest became, like something had pressed a hand over its mouth. We set up camp anyway. There were only 3 designated sites along that stretch of trail, and we were tired enough to ignore the unease creeping through the clearing. Mark pitched the tent while I gathered wood. Every few minutes my eyes drifted to the picnic table. Nothing sat there now, but the wood looked warm. Not warm in temperature, warm in color. The surface carried a faint amber sheen like skin under lamplight, though the sun had already dropped behind the ridge. "Probably resin," Mark said when I mentioned it. The fire crackled to life. Orange light climbed the trunks of the surrounding trees and threw long shadows across the table. Halfway through cooking noodles, Mark froze. "Do you see that?" I turned. Someone sat at the picnic table again. The figure leaned forward exactly as before, elbows planted, head slightly bowed. Firelight flickered across the outline of shoulders and hair. I stood slowly. "Hey!" I called. No response. We walked toward it together. 5 steps away, the air grew strangely cool, as if we'd stepped through a doorway into shade that wasn't there. 3 steps. 2. And then, empty wood. The bench creaked lightly, settling. Mark circled the table, scanning the clearing. "Okay," he said quietly. "That's not funny." I placed my hand on the tabletop. It was warm, not from the fire. The heat had depth to it, like a pulse stored in the wood. We didn't speak much after that. The forest felt altered, subtly rearranged. The trees seemed closer to the clearing than they had earlier. Their trunks formed narrow gaps that looked almost like corridors leading somewhere deeper. Once or twice I thought I saw movement between them, someone slipping behind bark. But every time I focused, it resolved into shadow. Around 10 the wind stopped entirely. The fire burned low, its light breathing across the picnic table. And slowly, almost politely, the figure returned. It appeared not all at once but in pieces. Darkness gathering along the bench, a suggestion of shoulders, a head tilting slightly. Mark inhaled sharply. "Don't move," he whispered. The figure faced us, not turning exactly, just orienting. The air between us stretched thin. Then it stood. The movement was wrong. Not stiff, not jerky, but delayed, like a memory of someone standing replayed half a second behind the body. It stepped away from the table and vanished. The bench rocked gently in its absence. That was when the memories started slipping. Small things at first. I couldn't remember packing the blue lantern, though it sat beside my pack. Mark insisted we'd bought it together last summer. Later I asked him when we'd started hiking. "Yesterday morning," he said, but I was certain we'd arrived that afternoon. The clearing felt older each time I looked at it. The grass around the picnic table appeared flattened, as if many people had stood there repeatedly, wearing down the earth in a rough circle. Except there were no other campsites nearby. Near midnight I walked to the edge of the trees. The forest had changed shape. Paths existed now where none had been before, narrow spaces between trunks leading deeper into shadow. The arrangement of branches formed archways that looked disturbingly deliberate. Architecture, not built exactly, grown into alignment, and all of it pointed back toward the picnic table. The figure returned again. This time it sat with its head tilted toward the tent. Toward Mark. I felt something cold move through my stomach. Because the silhouette looked like him. Not exactly, but close enough. Same narrow shoulders, same slope of neck. "Mark," I whispered. He didn't answer. Inside the tent, his breathing was steady with sleep. The figure lifted one hand slowly and mimicked the small absent-minded motion Mark often made, tapping two fingers on the table when thinking. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed strangely, as if the wood beneath it were hollow. I stepped forward. The air cooled again. Halfway to the table the forest shifted, trees sliding subtly, trunks narrowing the clearing until the table felt farther away than it should have been. The figure watched. I could feel its attention like a pressure inside my head. Curious, patient. When I reached the bench, it vanished. But something else didn't. A memory disappeared instead. I tried to recall Mark's last name. Nothing came. By morning the clearing had changed again. The picnic table stood slightly closer to the tent than before. Mark insisted it had always been there. "You're just tired," he said. But when we walked to the trailhead, the path curved differently. The trees formed corridors I didn't recognize. And halfway down the trail, we saw the clearing again. The same one. Same table. Same fire ring. Impossible because we'd been walking away for 20 minutes. Mark frowned. Did we circle around? Then he stopped. Because someone sat at the table. This time the figure looked like me. Same posture. Same jacket. It leaned forward, studying the wood grain with quiet concentration. Mark took a step toward it. "Hey!" I grabbed his arm. "Don't." The figure lifted its head slowly. Even from a distance I felt the weight of its gaze. It wasn't copying us anymore. It was refining us. Learning the shapes of our memories the way a sculptor studies clay. And the forest around it, the careful arrangement of trunks, branches, shadows, felt like a room built for that purpose. Mark stepped forward anyway. The air cooled. The clearing stretched. And as we approached, the figure remained seated longer than before. Watching. Waiting. Only disappearing when we were close enough to see the surface of its face. Later, when we tried to leave again, the trail ended back at the picnic table. And someone was already sitting there. This time the figure didn't vanish right away. It sat calmly in the amber morning light, elbows resting on the wood, studying us the way we had studied it. Behind it, the forest corridors shifted into new shapes, expanding, making space, as if the clearing had decided there were now 3 of us, and only 2 of us were allowed to leave. The forest floor shifted like sand, swallowing their footprints instantly. At first we thought it was just loose soil. The trail had narrowed into a thin ribbon of dirt winding between tall spruce trees whose branches filtered the afternoon light into muted green bands. Each step made a soft crunch, but the sound carried strangely, muted, absorbed by the earth instead of echoing back. When I looked behind us, the trail was smooth. No footprints. I stopped. "Did you notice that?" Jonah turned, brushing sweat from his temple. "Notice what?" "Our tracks." He glanced down the trail. The dirt looked untouched, like no one had walked it in years. Jonah shrugged. "Dry ground, probably collapsing back in." But I had hiked enough to know how soil behaved. Even loose dirt held an impression for a while. This didn't. I stepped backward deliberately, pressing my boot down. The ground compressed under my weight with a faint sigh, like air leaving a lung. And then it lifted again. The imprint vanished. Not gradually. Instantly. Jonah crouched and touched the earth. "Feels wrong," he said. The soil wasn't gritty like sand or firm like dirt. It had a soft elasticity, almost like damp moss compressed into powder. When he pressed harder, the surface sank slightly, then rose again. The ground healed itself. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the smell of cold minerals and something older, like whetstone deep underground. "We should keep moving," Jonah said after a moment. but his voice sounded quieter than usual, like the forest had absorbed some of it. As we walked, the ground began to move more noticeably. Not dramatically, just subtle adjustments beneath each step. The soil shifted sideways, tiny grains sliding over one another in a slow whisper. Our boots sank half an inch deeper than they should have. Behind us, the trail erased itself with patient efficiency. I began to feel a strange pressure in my ears, like descending in altitude. The trees grew taller the farther we went. Their trunks leaned inward slightly, narrowing the sky to thin strips of pale light. Jonah checked the map twice. "This trail should cut east," he said, but the compass needle trembled, drifting a few degrees each time we looked. Underfoot the ground rolled faintly, like the surface of water settling after a stone drop. An hour later we tried to turn back. The trail behind us looked unfamiliar. Not erased exactly, rewritten. The terrain had shifted into shallow ridges and dips that hadn't been there before. The spacing of the trees felt subtly different, like furniture rearranged in a room while you weren't looking. "Did we come through here?" Jonah asked. "I think so, but I wasn't certain." Because the forest floor held no memory of us. No broken twigs. No footprints. Nothing to confirm we had ever passed through. The ground had swallowed the evidence the moment it formed. By late afternoon, the soil began reacting before we stepped. I noticed it first when Jonah paused near a fallen log. The dirt around his boots stirred softly, grains rolling away from him in small circular patterns. "What's it doing?" I whispered. Jonah shifted his weight. The movement followed him. The earth wasn't collapsing randomly. It was adjusting, accommodating him, like it anticipated where he would stand. A cold wind slid through the trees. The temperature dropped fast, though the sun still hung above the ridge. Jonah lifted his boot. The depression vanished instantly, as if relieved to be free of him. We walked faster. The ground began to feel unstable, small waves traveling beneath the soil. Each step sank deeper before rising again. The sound it made wasn't quite sand. It was closer to breathing. Long, slow exhalations. The forest darkened prematurely as clouds drifted across the sky, but the light filtering through the canopy behaved strangely, bending sideways in narrow bands that illuminated patches of ground like spotlights. Each time light touched the soil, it rippled. Not randomly, purposefully, like muscles shifting under skin. Jonah stopped suddenly. "Listen." At first I heard only wind, then something else. A faint dragging sound beneath the ground. Not roots. Movement. Slow, deliberate sliding beneath the surface. The soil swelled slightly in front of us, forming a low mound, then flattened again. "Animals?" I suggested weakly. Jonah shook his head. "Too big." The ground between us and the mound shifted gently, as if something beneath it were testing the distance. Measuring. The soil rolled closer by inches. That night we tried to camp. Finding a flat patch was impossible. The earth refused stillness. Every few seconds it shifted subtly, creating shallow dips where none existed before. Our tent stakes slid loose within minutes. The ground simply wouldn't hold them. Jonah pressed both palms against the soil. "Feels warm," he said quietly. I knelt beside him. He was right. Beneath the cool surface lay a slow, steady warmth, like body heat. The moment my hands touched the ground, the soil stirred beneath them. Not violently, curiously. Grains moved toward my fingers in soft spirals, pressing lightly against my skin. Pulled away. The movement stopped. Sleep came in fragments. Each time I drifted off, the ground shifted under my sleeping bag, adjusting my position, turning me slightly, aligning me. At one point, I woke to the sound of Jonah speaking. "Stop," he murmured. "Just stop." I sat up. The earth beneath him had risen into a shallow slope, lifting his body toward me like a tilted mattress. "Did you move?" I asked. "No." The soil sank again slowly, but the movement felt deliberate, like a correction. Near dawn we tried walking again. The terrain had changed overnight. Low ridges curved across the forest floor like the ribs of something enormous buried just beneath the surface. The spaces between them formed narrow paths. Jonah followed one instinctively. The ground shifted as we walked, smoothing the route ahead while erasing the one behind. We were being guided, or arranged. The deeper we went, the more the forest seemed to lean toward us. Trees bent inward. Roots lifted slightly from the ground like knuckles pressing upward. The soil around our boots flowed faster now, reacting instantly to every step. But something else was happening. Jonah slowed. What? He looked confused. I can't remember where we started. That's normal, I said. We've been walking for hours. No, he whispered. I mean, I can't remember the trailhead. The word trailhead sounded unfamiliar to me too, like a place from someone else's trip. By midday, the forest floor began forming shapes. Long depressions appeared where we paused, almost like outlines of our bodies. When we stepped away, they filled immediately. But the ground kept the memory for a moment before erasing it. Testing the shape, practicing. The dragging sound beneath us grew louder, closer. Sometimes the soil rose in long ripples moving parallel to our path. Other times it shifted directly beneath us, adjusting our footing, correcting our balance. Once I stumbled. The ground swelled instantly to catch my knee before it hit. Soft, supportive, almost gentle. I felt something then, not emotion exactly, but attention. The forest wasn't just reacting to our movement. It was learning it, studying weight, posture, balance, the way bodies occupied space. Late afternoon light turned the ground amber. The soil shimmered faintly as if saturated with liquid beneath the surface. Jonah stopped again. Do you hear voices? I listened. Not voices, but echoes. Our own footsteps replaying faintly under the ground, soft compressions repeating seconds after they happened. As though the forest were remembering us, rehearsing our presence. And then I noticed something behind us. Two shallow impressions in the soil. Footprints, but not ours. They appeared a few seconds after we walked, forming where we had just stepped. Following, practicing. Jonah stared at them, pale. They're ours. The ground beneath those impressions shifted. The prints lifted slowly, the soil rising upward into the faint shape of feet, testing their balance, then collapsing again. We started running. The forest floor surged beneath us, ridges flattening ahead while deep troughs opened behind. The terrain reshaped itself with terrifying patience, guiding us down long curving corridors between trees. But no matter which direction we ran, the ground eventually bent the path back. Circles within circles, until we stopped in a clearing we didn't remember entering. The soil there was perfectly smooth, untouched, waiting. Jonah stepped forward. The earth accepted his weight slowly like wet sand, then rose again once he lifted his foot. The impression vanished, but the ground remained slightly elevated, as if something beneath it had stood up. We tried to leave the clearing. The forest rearranged itself. The ground flowed gently under our boots, guiding us back to the center. The dragging sound below us stopped, replaced by silence. A long, listening silence. Then the soil moved again, this time forming two shallow depressions in front of us. Footprints, our footprints, facing outward, waiting to be stepped into. Jonah whispered something I couldn't hear. The ground beneath those prints rose slowly, testing the height of legs that weren't there yet. And behind us, the forest floor shifted softly, erasing our last memory of the way out.